It's entirely fitting that one of the world's most coveted pieces of paper, and one of the hardest to imitate, bears the image of one of history's greatest printers. Printing allowed Franklin to become Franklin.
So Franklin as a printer would eventually become the most successful in North America. Many would argue he was also the best in terms of the quality of the work that he produced.
It was a very valuable occupation to have because, of course, it put you right in the middle of the flow of information. And Franklin himself, he took a printing press with him wherever he went.
The press became Franklin's jumping-off point for the world of science and invention. And while the breakthroughs with electricity may be his greatest accomplishments, his work as a printer has also shaped our world.
His real bread and butter was the Pennsylvania Gazette. That was his main source of income. It became the leading newspaper in the colonies. People subscribed to it not only in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, but all over the 13 colonies.
Franklin opened satellite print shops across the colonies. And as the colony's deputy postmaster, he was able to link his print shops with the mail service.
The combination of the printing and postmaster network was, for its time, the most advanced communications network anywhere, not just in the colonies, but you might even say even in Europe. There wasn't anything quite so far-flung and sophisticated.
Franklin's innovations in the technology of printing came in the area of currency. His first, at age 22, was to convince the Pennsylvania colony that paper money was a good idea.
Being a printer, he was eager to get the commission to print the currency. And being the clever fellow he was, he published at his own expense a pamphlet expounding on his idea that there should be more paper currency than there presently was. And guess who got the commission to print it? He did.
Franklin then began a lifelong battle against counterfeiters. In an era when each colony had its own currency, a large counterfeit operation could destabilize a colony's economy. Franklin's early anti-counterfeit strategies included ornamentation and hard-to-find fonts, and a not-so-subtle threat.
He also had the idea of taking granulated mica flakes and embedding that, impressing that into the paper. He was always coming up with new ideas.
Franklin's greatest contribution to counterfeit-proof currency was his introduction of leaf printing.
He got the idea from this book, which he saw in the library of James Logan. Franklin saw this book and was fascinated with it. He and his friends went back to his printing office and began making nature prints of leaves on large sheets of paper, which he used to communicate botanical information to friends in London who were eager for any knowledge they could get about American plants.
Franklin realized that, like a fingerprint, every plant's leaf pattern is unique, and thus impossible to replicate.
And so he got the idea of creating copper plates cast from actual leaves. And he used those leaf prints to make the paper that he printed his currency on.
No one knows with certainty how Franklin made these engraving plates. He would have had to press the leaves into a soft plaster mold, then pour the molten metal to form the engraving plate. But there's a problem. Molten metal would crack the plaster. The theory is that Franklin added an insulating material, perhaps brick dust or asbestos, to keep the mold from breaking.
Although he gave all his other inventions away freely, this one he didn't, because obviously the counterfeiters would have used it.
The very complicated engraved designs that we have on our money today, not unlike the patterns of veins on these leaves, are directly inspired by Franklin's leaf prints, I think.
A lifetime of staring at currency patterns and fine print may have led the 78-year-old Franklin to one of his most enduring inventions.
They came out of his frustration when he was ambassador in France. His eyesight was failing. And almost every night he had a different social event, a dinner party to attend, that kind of thing. And what he found was that he couldn't both see the food on his plate and the faces of the people sitting across the table from him. And it was very important that he did see their faces because his French was not all that good. And he found it necessary to really be able to see people's lips when they spoke.
Franklin realized that when using his reading glasses, he looked through the bottom half of his lenses. With his distance glasses, he looked through the top half. And then came the idea. Cut each lens in half and reattach them, one on top of the other.
So many of Franklin's inventions are things that, as soon as he invented them, you would think, oh, of course, it makes perfect sense. And bifocals are a really good example of that.
Bifocals were the capping achievement for a visionary inventor. But Franklin's vision also encompassed entire systems. From fire departments and libraries to nations. In today's America, pulsing with electronic communication and complex transportation systems, Benjamin Franklin would probably feel right at home.
If Franklin were alive today, he'd be a true technological geek. He'd be showing off his BlackBerry or his Trio because he loved electricity, but he also loved the free flow of information. He loved communicating. He loved the mail system, and he'd love the email system. And certainly he'd have a website.
Franklin had a gift for inventing 18th century equivalents of such high-tech networks. Complex systems that served to improve society. He even helped invent a brand new type of nation. Franklin's first such idea was the Library Company of Philadelphia, which he founded at age 25. Anyone who bought a one-time share in the library could borrow a book and agree to return it later.
If you didn't return the book, you forfeited your deposit. It was in your interest to return the book. And you returned it and you came back later, you could be sure it was going to be there again for you to look at. And this made it into a permanent institution. The Library Company was the first successful public lending library in the world that I know of, and I think that that was a great invention. I might even go so far as to say it's Franklin's greatest invention.
This urge to democratize knowledge for the greater good grew out of Franklin's group of 12 fellow craftsmen, called the Leather Apron Club. The group was proudly named after the apron that identified them as skilled workers.
The middling sort is what they would call themselves in the 18th century, but people with skills who weren't born wealthy, who work with their hands. The purpose of the Leather Apron Club, or the Junto as it was later called, was to converse on Friday night over drink. They originally met at an ale house.
And they would form these groups to apply technology into our daily lives, whether it was for a good fire department or a good lending library.
Franklin was also a Freemason. And like Freemasonry, the Junto was originally a secret organization. It eventually became the American Philosophical Society, the nation's first learned society. Franklin and his middling colleagues would also organize America's first volunteer militia, found the nation's first hospital, and create the first non-religious college in America. The inventor of the lightning rod took a comprehensive approach to fire prevention. He built his Philadelphia home using fire-resistant plaster to separate the brick from the wood. He and his fellow Junto members brought in state-of-the-art fire engines from England and organized bucket brigades into the city's first volunteer fire company. A tireless innovator in every stage of his career, Postmaster Franklin modernized the colony's mail system.
He established a framework for the entire postal system that included the establishment of post offices, the mapping of routes that included determining distances between post offices and also setting rates for different increments along the postal routes. Do you know that during his time he improved efficiency to the extent that it took 1 day to get a letter from Philadelphia to New York. We're lucky to get that kind of service today.
But the greatest system Benjamin Franklin invented was the United States itself. Of course, he wasn't the only inventor. But from his prescient attempts to unite the colonies in the 1750s, through his brilliant Treaty of Amity with France, to his critical Great Compromise in 1787 that created 2 houses of Congress, Franklin was the great uniter.
One of Franklin's scientific principles was unification. He loved to unify things, bring them together, so he'd had a single theory of electricity. But that also applied to his politics because he liked to bring colonies together. He liked to bring people together.
The hand of Franklin the scientist may be most clearly seen in his notes on the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson's original draft had read, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." Franklin replaced the religious language with a phrase taken from scientific observation.
Truths that are self-evident. That was Franklin's language. He took that directly from Newton. That's scientific language.
It's in this sense that the lightning rod and the great American experiment in democracy are connected. Just as Franklin the scientist and Franklin the founding father are one and the same.